It all started on what was supposed to be a quiet morning at my cabin. I had just stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy the peace of the woods when I noticed a group from the local marching up my driveway. Their faces were full of authority, and before I could even say a word, one of them announced that I was trespassing on their land. I was stunned. I knew for a fact that I wasn't in their hoe. I held the deed, the papers, everything that proved this cabin and the land it sat on was mine. But things didn't stop there. Within minutes, one of them had their phone out calling the cops, while another started waving their arms around, demanding I leave immediately. The situation was escalating fast, and the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. I tried to stay calm, reminding them over and over that I wasn't part of their hoe, but it felt like my words were only fueling their anger. When the police arrived, I thought things would finally be sorted out. Instead, the situation took a shocking turn. The HOA president stepped forward, pointing her finger straight at me with a look that could cut glass. She insisted that I was the intruder, that I didn't belong here, and that their rules gave them the right to decide. The officers looked between us, clearly unsure who to believe. That's when I dropped the truth that froze everyone in their tracks. I told them not only was I not in their hoe, but I actually owned the land the HOA president herself was living on. The look on her face said it all. And just when I thought the drama couldn't go any further, something happened that left us all standing in stunned silence. The silence after my words hung heavier than the trees around us. The HOA president's face shifted from anger to shock, then back to anger even stronger than before. The officers glanced at each other, clearly realizing this wasn't some simple neighborly dispute. I could feel the tension rising, and for a moment it seemed like everyone was waiting to see who would make the next move. As I stood there, I couldn't help but think back to how this all began. When I first bought this cabin, I knew it came with history, but I never imagined that history would include being tangled up with a power-hungry hoe. The land had been in dispute for years, passed down through a messy web of deeds and old boundary agreements. I spent months digging through county records, working with a lawyer, and finally securing proof that this property was mine, every tree, every rock, and yes, even the plot where the HOA president's house stood. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had been trying to force me out, demanding I follow her rules, when in reality she was the one standing on ground that legally belonged to me. Still, I hadn't come here to start a war. I wanted peace, a quiet retreat in the woods, not endless conflict. But the HOA didn't see it that way. From the moment I moved in, they treated me like an outsider, someone who didn't belong. Now, with the police here and neighbors gathering at the edge of the road, whispers started spreading. People pulled out phones, recording, waiting for the drama to unfold. My heart was pounding, but I knew this was far from over. What came next would decide everything, and the real fight hadn't even started yet. The HOA president stepped closer, her voice sharper now, almost trembling as she insisted I was lying. She told the officers that I forged papers, that I was some kind of squatter trying to pull a scam. Her confidence was rattled, but she wasn't backing down. I could see her neighbors shifting uncomfortably behind her, some of them whispering, others staring at me like they weren't so sure anymore. The divide in their expressions told me not everyone believed her story, but no one dared speak up. The police, caught in the middle, asked for proof. I explained that I had the original deed tucked safely in my cabin, stamped and recorded at the county courthouse. But before I could say more, the HOA president cut me off, claiming she had her own documents showing authority over my property. That's when the real conflict began to surface, not just between me and her, but within the HOA itself. A man from the crowd, someone I hadn't met before, finally spoke up. He admitted he had always wondered about the boundary lines and how she seemed to control land that wasn't originally part of the subdivision. His words drew even more murmurs, and suddenly it wasn't just me standing against her. It was doubt spreading through her own group. At the same time, I could feel the officers growing impatient. They wanted clarity, but this wasn't the kind of problem that could be solved on the spot. The law was on my side, but the HOA's influence was strong, and I knew they weren't going to let this go easily. My mind raced as I realized this was no longer just about my cabin. It was about power, control, and secrets buried in the land itself. And standing there, I could sense that the truth was about to unravel in ways none of us were prepared for. The crowd around us grew restless as the tension thickened. Neighbors who once stood quietly in the background were now edging closer, eager to hear every word. Some of them had their phones raised, recording every second, and I could feel the weight of all those eyes on me. The whole president, red-faced and desperate, pulled out a thick binder from her bag and waved it in the air, shouting that her rules covered every inch of this community. But as she flipped through the papers, her hands trembled, and it was clear she wasn't as certain as she pretended to be. The officers stood in the middle, their expressions tightening as they tried to make sense of the chaos. One of them asked me again about my proof, but before I could answer, the president slammed her binder shut and pointed at me, declaring that if they didn't remove me, the entire neighborhood would fall apart. Her words sparked an argument in the crowd, voices rising, neighbors accusing her of going too far, others still backing her with fierce loyalty. The once united HOA was splitting right in front of us. I felt the air grow heavy as the conflict hit a boiling point. It wasn't just about land anymore, it was about pride, reputation, and the grip she had held over this place for years. I could see the cracks in her authority widening with every word spoken against her. Yet at the same time, her supporters dug in deeper, their voices growing louder, determined to protect the image of the HOA no matter what. The standoff was reaching its peak. The police demanded silence. The neighbors shouted over each other, and I stood there with the truth burning in my hands. Everything was building to one final moment where the truth and the lies would finally collide. Just when it seemed the shouting couldn't get any louder, a voice cut through the noise, a steady, older man from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned as he stepped forward, holding a small folder under his arm. I hadn't seen him before, but the way people shifted when he spoke made it clear he carried some kind of weight in the neighborhood. He looked directly at the HOA president, his tone calm but sharp, and said, "Maybe it's time you told them the truth about the land." The entire crowd fell silent. The president froze, her jaw tightening as she shook her head, denying it. But the man didn't back down. He opened his folder and pulled out yellow documents, copies of old survey maps and property transfers. He explained that years ago, before the HOA even existed, parts of the subdivision were built on land that was never properly purchased. Boundaries were blurred, and records got buried. According to his papers, the very lot where the HOA president's house stood had been contested for decades, and I was the one holding the rightful claim now. The gasp that went through the crowd was deafening. Neighbors who had been siding with her started whispering, some glancing nervously at their own houses, wondering if their land was part of the same mistake. The president's face turned pale as she snapped at him, calling him a liar, but her voice cracked under the pressure. The police officers exchanged uneasy looks, realizing this conflict was bigger than they had imagined. I could feel the ground shift beneath us, not just in a legal sense, but in power. The HOA wasn't only fighting me anymore, they were facing their own buried secrets. And the deeper those secrets went, the more dangerous the truth was becoming. The silence after the old man's reveal was almost unbearable. The HOA president's face turned from pale to furious, and she lunged forward, snatching the papers from his hands. But it was too late. The officers had already seen enough. One of them calmly took the documents, comparing them to the copy of my deed I finally retrieved from my cabin. The match was undeniable. Every line, every stamp confirmed what I had been saying from the start. The property was mine, and more than that, the land her house stood on was tied to my deed as well. The crowd erupted into arguments, neighbors pointing fingers at the president, some demanding answers, others panicking about their own lots. Years of fear and control she had held over them were unraveling in a single moment. Her authority was gone, stripped away in front of everyone she had ruled over. She tried to shout over the noise, insisting she still had the final say, but nobody was listening anymore. The police finally stepped in, telling her she had no legal power over me or my land. The HOA's grip was finished. But just when I thought it was over, the old man spoke again. He looked at me with a strange expression and said, "Owning the land is one thing, but you need to know why she fought so hard to keep you out." He tapped the edge of the survey map, pointing to a shaded area near the boundary line. Buried under that land, according to the forgotten records, wasn't just property, it was something far more valuable, something that explained the HOA's desperate attempts to control it. Everyone went silent again. The conflict had been resolved, but a new mystery had just been unearthed, one that promised this battle was only the beginning. The air was still heavy as everyone leaned in to see what the old man was pointing to on the map. He explained that years ago, the land had been surveyed for development, and during that process something unusual had been discovered, an underground spring running beneath several lots, including mine. That spring wasn't just a source of fresh water. It was tied to rights the whole president had kept hidden, rights that could make the land worth far more than anyone realized. Suddenly, her desperate attempts to push me out made sense. She wasn't protecting community rules. She was protecting her own secret. Once the truth came out, the tension began to break. Neighbors who had sided with her looked embarrassed, while others seemed relieved that someone had finally stood up to her. The police made it clear there was nothing criminal on my end and told everyone that disputes over property needed to be handled in court, not through intimidation. The whole president stormed off, her power shattered, while the crowd slowly dispersed, each person whispering about what had just happened. I stood on my porch later that evening, staring at the deed in my hands. What began as a simple dream of owning a quiet cabin had turned into a battle for truth, control, and respect. The experience had tested my patience and courage, but it had also revealed how fragile power can be when it's built on fear and lies. In the end, I kept my land, my peace, and something even more valuable, a reminder that standing your ground matters, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The Ho had tried to write my story for me, but in the end, I held the pen. And this chapter was mine to close.